Dave Wilson, ESPN.com, is the one that had the story today about both Dana Holgorsen and Todd Graham joining the TCU coaching staff, and he joins us on 365 Sports. We're going to discuss quite a bit of college football. Dave, thanks for your time. Craig Smoke, Paul Catalina, David Smoke, 365 Sports. So we had heard about Holgorsen. When did the Todd Graham discussion enter the picture for Sonny Dykes and TCU?
Well, I've over the years, I've been around TCU a couple of times, and Todd has been around. And so they have a relationship that goes back a while. And, Sonny's a pretty laid-back guy, but he said, he valued Todd's insight because Todd doesn't exactly pull punches. And so he said the worst thing you can have as a coach is to have a bunch of yes men around you. And he said, I always like having people from different perspectives. And so, it's very similar to Gary Patterson working with Baylor. It's very similar to all these analysts that go to Alabama to work for Nick Saban. They want to stay in coaching. They want to be involved. And, in Sonny's case, in 2017, he was an analyst for Gary Patterson at TCU. So it's kind of full circle there. Working with people you trust and you value their input. And I think that it's something that he's been talking about for the last, several months. He's mentioned Holgorsen in the past. They obviously were joined at the hip. They were co-offensive coordinators under Leach at Texas Tech, so they know each other really well. And I think there's just a comfort level sometimes. And, in this business, it's a small world, and guys help each other out, and they try to keep them in and help them get other jobs. But in this case, he had a disappointing year, and he wanted to take a look at everything.
Todd Graham, the ending at Arizona State wasn't kind of like it was for Dana at Houston, and he's been out of the loop for a little while, but he got his start in Texas. He tried to recruit hard in Texas. He's been kind of known as a guy who's a little bit bristly, to say the least. What kind of edge do you think that those guys particularly bring, kind of attitude-wise, into that coaching staff?
One of the interesting things about Graham is obviously he's had his stories about, signing a contract at Rice and leaving 2 days later to go back to Tulsa, and he left at Pitt after 1 year. And there's an ambition there that I think is pretty brazen. But if you go back to Todd Graham's history, he's hired a lot of great coaches. He hired, he was the first guy to give Dan Lanning a job. He's hired guys everywhere he's been that are good coaches. So he has the talent for that. And I think coaches respect that when you have an eye for even coaching talent, not just football. And so, it's funny, in 2022, when TCU went on that run, I did a story about sort of how they put that year together in Dykes' first year there. And he told me in the preseason, Todd Graham came in to sort of look over the team and the program with him. And he said, he told us we're going to win the conference. And he said, I was shocked. I was like, he told me that in like August that year. Todd Graham was just here, and he thinks we're going to win the conference. And he's like, I don't know what he sees, but I hope he's right. And, they ended up having a great year. And so, and he said, similarly, back at SMU, he came in year one, and he said, your players aren't good, your coaches aren't good, you're not going to be any good. And he said, we went 5-7 that year. So he said, he's kind of savant-like in that way, and I just value his insight. And so that is a relationship that he believes in, and he trusts his judgment, and he's been right so far. So he's like, why not? He wants to work, and I need the eyeballs, and so why not? And I think that's a big part of it. And that's the edge that he brings is he's unvarnished. Sonny said it diplomatically. He said, Todd is very direct. And I think that is it.
Dave, so for people who, I think probably most people watching this show know what an analyst does, but for those perhaps tuning in for the first time or something along those lines, what will be kind of on the plate of Holgorsen and also Todd Graham when it comes to the week-to-week, the day-to-day, and what they're going to be doing?
Yeah, I think analyst jobs differ. There's I've heard of some of Saban's analysts. Like there was one guy that I talked to one time, and I don't want to say his name, but he's actually a offensive coordinator in the Big Ten now. But he told me once when he was one of Saban's analysts, his entire job was to compile the quarterback binder for recruits. And that's all he did year round was work on a binder of quarterback recruits. And Nick would call him in and say, all right, turn to a page and a random guy and ask me about him. And then Saban would rattle off everything he knew about the guy and then say, okay, let's call him. And so it's like at an operation that deep and that big, obviously you can stack those guys. TCU and Baylor traditionally haven't had, 40 staffers in off-field roles like those programs do. But I think you're starting to see that a little more. It basically is another set of eyes from a coach that you trust or somebody who's a expert in one thing. And in this case, what I found interesting about what the TCU plan is he wants Graham, who is a longtime defensive background, to work with the offense to basically say, here's how I would attack you right now in that formation. Here's what I would do to you, to basically prepare them for here's what teams are going to do to you. And then similarly with Holgorsen, he wants him to work with the defense to be like, here's how I would attack this, or here's where people are going to see your weaknesses. So it's just basically you have they've added 4 former head coaches to that staff after a 5-7 season. And he basically is like, he wants experience, he wants eyeballs, he wants to change the program. And so analysts dig deep on sort of the minutia of the program.
I wonder how many head coaches, for example, Aranda brought in Gary Patterson. We know Nick Saban, and you brought that up, used to have former, like the rehabilitation tour, including now Steve Sarkisian, who, of course, is having a nice run at Texas, among others, and UT's had theirs. How many coaches you think out of the 130 plus in the FBS, Dave, would not have a former head coach as an analyst or on their staff because of ego?
Yeah, I do think that is interesting. I mean, you guys see, we deal with a variety of personalities as coaches. I think as those go, Sonny Dykes is one of the more laid back guys. And so, those are very strong personalities. And so basically I said, these are strong personalities. These are guys that have no problem giving their opinion on any subject generally. I mean, their press conferences were always, entertaining. And he said, well, yeah, that's what you want. You don't want a bunch of people that just sitting around going, oh, yeah, you're the greatest. I agree with you. I want people to challenge what we're doing. And so I do think that's the thing. Now, obviously, you have to have the confidence and you have to be able to run a ship where those egos can't take over, because that sometimes is a problem, when guys are used to doing it their way and they're not doing it their way anymore, and that can lead to dissent. But I think in this case, like he said, I've known both those guys for more than 20 years, and that's no issue there. But I think it is a sort of a healthy sign of a lack of ego if you can hire 4 former head coaches to your staff in one season, perhaps, because you have to feel pretty confident in what you're doing to do that.
Dave Wilson, ESPN.com, with us on 365 Sports. We off to the side, we were talking the other day, I believe it was in Vegas. When are you going to write that piece on Switzer?
I'm working on that. I'm planning on going to see him again, but that's still a little under wraps. We'll see how that goes. I just think it's fascinating that guys like Barry Switzer and people of his ilk are still around, and very much a factor in their towns. And so I'm looking forward to that. I think it'll be a fun story. I think people will be interested in reading about what a 86-year-old legend is doing, hanging around his small town.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it. I don't want to give that away, but I just wanted to give you a chance to visit with it. The Bootlegger's Boy was a big deal. I remember reading that paperback book, and good luck with that. So Dave Wilson with us, ESPN.com with 365 Sports. If you look at the Big 12, honestly, 16 teams, it's a huge conference. All of these are 16, 17, and now 18 teams. How many of the 16 do you truly believe have a chance to play for the Big 12 title?
I would say 8. I mean, it's crazy. There is, if you look at it, I mean, think about it, right? You think about a team like West Virginia that won 9 games last year. They had really close losses too. So if they have a TCU-like run where they win those close games, do they win 11 games? I heard coaches all over the Big 12 during media days talk about Garrett Green as a guy who is really tough and will beat you. He's a gamer. He's a winner. That's the one thing they keep saying. So you have guys like that. You have Oklahoma State, who obviously had a very perplexing year last year, blown out at home by South Alabama, got blown out by UCF, and then go to the championship game. You've got a team like Kansas State, who probably should have beat Texas last year and didn't. And, if Jalen Daniels is healthy, Kansas is a real factor. He hasn't been healthy for a couple of years, but he's a great player and stayed. Arizona, you look at Fafita and McMillan, the receiver. I mean, those are lethal weapons over there. And so, and then that's not even mentioning Utah, who's kind of the favorite. And so it's not a stretch to say, I think 7, 8 teams probably, if things went right or the schedule lines up, have a real chance. And I think that is what makes this conference so much fun. It's what makes it, and also these are places where you can still afford to go to games. You look at tickets for some of these SEC games, they're insane. And so I think for my money, the Big 12 is the most entertaining conference in America. And I sure can't wait to watch what happens.
Yeah, I'm curious on if they beat each other up so much because there's such an even playing field if you only get one team in the playoff because everybody else has like 3 losses, or if you're going to be able to, because of the scheduling, have a couple of teams at minimum that are able to get in. That's one of my big questions. But Dave, you were around the media day circuit. I know it's just talking season. There's not always a lot to pull out of it. There's some highlights here and there, but you were in Vegas, and what did you just think kind of looking around, seeing Dion in Colorado? The fact that we were in Vegas for starters for the Big 12 media days, Arizona State rolling around there, just a collection of teams, and in comparison to maybe some of the other places you went, just what did you make of the whole scene?
Well, I think for one, if you think about it, this was the first time in years that we were there, and everything was good. Everybody was happy to be there. There were no people that were kind of, issuing questions about their future in the conference.
Right.
There was a real sort of kumbaya feel to it. I mean, those teams are excited to be there. Arizona State, I was talking to a guy at Arizona State, and he was telling me about how they found out that they had an Iowa State alumni club in Scottsdale that has 5,000 members. And they're like, you know what that means for us for like basketball and things like that? And it's funny, you're finding these little pockets of interesting things of like, hey, we've got a whole new audience to sell our product to. And we're going to be playing some really fun teams and really fun games. And so that's the takeaway I took from it, was people are just genuinely excited. It's a whole new, you kind of take the top off with Texas and Oklahoma. Texas hadn't won too many of those conferences in the last, decade, but they were always a tough out. And then Oklahoma dominated. So you take those off, and now it's just wide open. That's what I took away from it was, wow, this is, there's something interesting here. And I feel like in the future, the super conference era that we see, I think there's a place for this conference for pure entertainment value that is going to be hard to beat.
Say you said 8 teams have a shot to win it. What 4 don't have a shot to win it?
Well, I think Cincinnati is tough. That's it's sort of a sad period right now. I mean, think about the coaches that have come through Cincinnati, and they've all won there. Mark D'Antonio and Brian Kelly and, Luke Fickell and even Butch Jones had a lot of success there. I don't mean even in a rude way. I mean, it's just a lot of names. And right now, to step up in conference at the same time as NIL and the portal became a real factor, I think that was a real challenge for them. Losing Fickell, losing a 4-year starter at quarterback, losing 2 stud defensive backs, everything hit them right at a tough time. And so that one, I think they're still got a lot of work to do. I think Arizona State's got a lot of work to do. And in Houston, I love Willie Fritz. I think he's just an incredible coach. He's won everywhere he's been. And so I just think those are 3. And then I'm going to say, I need to see a little more from Colorado. I know they imported a whole bunch of new players, and there's all the excitement and enthusiasm. They have talent. But the offense, dumping Sean Lewis, who was actually, they were doing a good job on offense. They just couldn't protect the quarterback. But I think that was a talent issue and not a scheme issue. So I think that's one where that's going to be an interesting season for them too.
Dave, great job as always, man. Appreciate it. He and I used to cover JUCO basketball games, Masters, Jim, Kilgore, and others around East Texas, and that's how we first got to meet. Now he's with ESPN and has been a great writer. Dave Wilson with us on 365 Sports on Todd Graham, Dana Holgorsen, and more, and some of the background on how that came about with Sonny Dykes and his staff at TCU.
Yeah.